Earlier this afternoon, just moments ago, the mayor of the city of Chicago announced continuing cuts and devastation to the budgets of the public schools in Chicago. Just last night, less than 24 hours ago, the mayor detailed $200 million in cuts to the public schools. And while much remains unclear about the details of those cuts, it is clear that what cuts have been specified would do real damage to our schools. It includes cuts in elementary sports. It includes cuts to maintenance or repairs in the public schools. It includes the claim that special education is overfunded. And if anyone is familiar with the conditions for special education students and our most vulnerable learners, that's a laughable proposition. And although it's not yet clear to us exactly what form this will take, the mayor is also talking about 1,400 layoffs as part of those cuts. It's extremely troubling. These cuts will hurt the most vulnerable students in the city of Chicago, who are some of the most vulnerable students in the state. In addition, the mayor has also suggested a 7% cut in compensation to teachers. That would take the form of eliminating a pension pickup, which has been part of teachers' overall compensation since the early 80s. This is troubling to us because it appears to be backsliding, backtracking on commitments that were made at the bargaining table. Because right now, frankly, the city's bargaining position is that the pension pickup would remain for the upcoming year. The mayor talked about the reality to address a looming fiscal crisis for the schools. The reality is that there does need to be a tax increase in the city of Chicago to address school funding. That's something which the union has been talking about for a long time. But we need a progressive tax solution, not a regressive tax solution which hits the poorest people, the people whose entire savings is tied up in their house. If you think about the causes, the need for this, for an increase in funding, an increase in revenue, it's tied to many things. It's tied really in large part to over a decade of missed pension payments. But it's also tied to several decades of building spree on the part of the Chicago Public Schools, in which year after year, the city of Chicago's capital budget exceeded $1 billion. And they built new schools and renovated schools. And to have a situation where the interest on the debt accumulated from school building over the last 20 years will approach $300 million next year alone. I'll say it again. The building spree for the last 2 decades, behind Renaissance 2010 and other school building programs, has created a situation where the maintenance on debt, simply the capital fees, will total almost $300 million for next year. At the same time the city was spending on its credit card to build schools, it refused to take advantage of tax options which were available at the time. So for example, we've recently discovered that there was a $50 million a year capital improvement tax, which the city and the city council never made use of. And so the current fiscal crisis has been created by a long-term pattern of poor fiscal management, which has to come back to the feet of the mayor and the hand-picked board which the mayor appointed. And so we have a situation where a series of bad financial deals are crippling the city and have led the schools to the edge of a financial cliff. And yet somehow, the person who's responsible for appointing the people who created those policies is now trying to ask frontline educators to take a 7% pay cut in order to solve the crisis. And that will not be acceptable for the teachers union. It will not be acceptable to people who send their kids to public school because it will cause devastation in the front, in the halls, in the frontline, to the frontline educators across the city. I will say one more thing, which is the mayor also talked about solutions coming from Springfield. The Chicago Teachers Union has opposed the legislation which is currently in front of the Senate. I believe it's Senate Bill 316, which proposes, among other things, for the state to pick up the normal cost of pension payments for pensions. And the reason we oppose it is there's no new realistic revenue that's on the table only limitations on existing revenue. So it calls for a property tax freeze. At the same time that it talks about undercutting or doing away with the block grant, which is the main way that the Chicago Public Schools are funded. And so the actual proposed solutions on the table in Springfield does not look like a real solution to us. The most dangerous part of that proposal is the proposal to go back to a pension holiday, to short the pension fund $500 million a year for next year and the year after, which will only lead to higher and higher payments in the future. And that's not a real solution. We must come back to having sustainable revenue solutions. So I'll take any questions.
Have you received any information?
So what are you for?
What are we for? There have been a number of things which we've suggested. And I'll start at the city level. We think that as an earnest payment, if you will, it's not going to solve the whole problem, but we think the mayor needs to look into the TIF surplus, needs to declare a surplus in the unallocated funds and TIFs. I've seen calculations that there are as many as $700 million in those funds right now, and even if you can't declare surplus in all of it, a payment of a couple $100 million would go a long way on that front. Secondly, the mayor's hand-picked president of the Board of Ed, David Calley, was the chief architect and proponent for a series of high-risk financial deals that called bond rates, interest rate swaps, which have really hurt the school district. And we think that over the course of these deals, which began in the mid-2000s, but which extend forward for up to 30 years, we think that they cost the district upwards of $500 million. And these are direct transfers on bad bets to banks that stand to profit directly. These are banks and financial institutions which continue to do business with the city of Chicago. Why not sue the banks or file for arbitration as they've done in Tennessee, as they've done in San Francisco, and other places around the country? Demand some rebates from the banks. I mean, why should they be making literally $500 million in windfall profits at exactly the time when our schools are being slashed? There's a number of other proposals for revenue, which we need Springfield fund for, to help us. It can't be the case that every time the mayor goes to Springfield, and the last time he went to Springfield, it was to ask us to take a pension holiday last week. The time before that he went to Springfield, it was to ask the legislature permission to close 50 schools and undercut the timeline which they had previously imposed. Let the mayor go to Springfield and ask for a millionaire's tax. Let the mayor go to Springfield and ask for some kind of closing of corporate loophole taxes. Let the mayor go to Springfield and ask for some progressive forms of taxation which don't just hit the working class property holders in the bungalow belt in Chicago and some of the poorest people. Those are the kind of solutions that we're talking about.
In terms of the layoffs, it seems to have stayed away mostly from your union members. How many CTU members are affected? I mean, some of the cuts are to startup funding for charter schools, so it seems to be limiting the damage to teachers union members. Is that correct or incorrect?
It's a little bit too early to tell. I don't know. $200 million is a lot of money to cut out of the schools, and frankly, I wish you guys would get uncover just how facetious this claim is about the what he said $940 million worth of cuts for central office and operations. The entire amount they pay for central office is a fraction of that. It's on the order of $200 million. You can't cut $900 million out of something that only costs $200 million to operate. The math in that is funny math. In fact, the CTU has a report, which I believe, are we putting out the report?
Yes.
It's out, people have it, that goes through those claims a little bit and how erroneous that claim is. All that is by way of saying that we haven't really looked underneath the hood on the claims about where layoffs are coming, but I'll say one more thing, which is that one of the areas that we're very concerned about the cuts is in the area of special education. And we know that the district has a really hard time finding special ed teachers that are qualified and work in our schools. And we think that there are maybe as many as 300, 350 open vacancies. And so if they simply close those vacancies, they can claim it's not a layoff. And the truth of the matter is those are 350 positions which special education students will suffer from, and because they won't be able to get teachers. It'll foreclose the possibility of them getting teachers for their classes.
Those 300 to 350 you just mentioned, you mean for the upcoming school year? Those are positions that are currently open?
That's correct. Yeah. So you can close positions that are currently vacant that you're trying to hire for. You don't have to call it a layoff. But the truth of the matter is that hurts the students who can't find teachers. Go ahead.
$200 million in cuts. That number has been discussed rather consistently for months now, behind the scenes. Are you concerned about the prospect of additional cuts?
Absolutely.
How real of a chance do you think that is, and what could it come from?
The district has been talking about a $1 billion operating deficit, and they've been using that talk to sort of point blame at the pension, right? But there's a lot of more components to that than a pension payment. You know, I've mentioned the $300 million or so, you know, that they need to make sort of debt maintenance payments. You know, the truth of the matter is that this district has used gimmick budgets, you know, smoke and mirrors, you know, gimmicks, in order to balance the budget for the last 4 years, one-term revenue sources, etc. And they need to come up with a sustainable revenue for the schools, or else there will be program cuts that will look like more students in classes, you know, kinds of supports that we need in order to run high-quality programs. So, you know, okay, you know, we're cutting central office, but then you look at what that actually amounts to, and they're cutting the English language art and math curriculum supports that teachers need in order to like be able to prepare for you know, the challenges they have for dealing with students today. You're cutting out clinician services and you know, other kinds of wraparound social supports for students. I mean, it is it's just not accurate to claim that these are really being kept away from students. These cuts will affect students.
What is the mayor's proposal to basically give you back the pension pickup going to do at the bargaining table, and when are you back at the bargaining table?
We bargained as recently as Monday. I mean, what I hope we're not hearing is a backtracking on that. You know, giving us a sign that they're walking backwards at the table in a press conference would be extremely bad, you know, bad etiquette, bad sign, and something that we would take umbrage at. You know, I don't know if that's true. I don't know if he's talking, you know, theoretically or you know, or figuratively or what. We'll see. I was a little confused by that and a little dismayed to hear it.
Are you still talking one-year deal? That's sort of what's on the table still?
Yeah, I mean, our opinion has been, and the reason we proposed it, is that there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the public schools, and a one-year deal would be the best way to tide us over until we get some clarity about where we're at. Let me take one more.
Should the pension fund agree to this $500 loan after getting this payment?
You know, you're referring to a proposal that I've seen floating around that the pension fund would loan the schools money in return for which, you know, a promise to repay, obviously. You know, in my opinion, that's a question for the pension fund that has to do with whether it's actually a good deal. I will say this, you know, the idea that the pension fund, you know, the fund of retired teachers would come up and lend a hand and help the district with its finances. To me, that's another example of teachers who spent, you know, 35 or 40 years in their career helping educate students, and now in their retirement are helping once again. But whether or not that's actually a good deal is going to depend on the details of what, you know, the details of that, the details of that deal.
Just, can I just ask, I mean, in the spirit of everyone putting skin in the game, why isn't it fair to have a $175 million special property tax levy dedicated directly to pensions in exchange for teachers giving up the pension pickup?
The last contract that we did in the Chicago Public Schools, the mayor added 20% to with a longer day and a longer school year. Teachers are in fact working their fingers to the bone in classrooms right now, and we're doing it in an environment which is extremely under-resourced and which working conditions are difficult. And every day I hear from the frontline educators about those problems. To say that then what we're going to do is, on top of that, we're going to that insult, we're going to add the injury of a 7% pay cut. That's what it would be. People's paychecks would go down 7%. In the context in which we've seen, you know, 5-year deals for police and fire at 11%. We've seen, you know, continued spending on DePaul arenas and river walks and a city that's drenched in wealth. And you're going to say, but the way we're going to solve the problem with the schools is ask people to work 20% more at the same time they take a 7% cut. That's just not going to be acceptable. You know, that would be a fighting position, and our union wouldn't back down from that. So that's it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.